Have you been thinking about purchasing a short term rental property? If so, we got some questions that you should ask yourself before purchasing. Hello, and welcome to the Wealth Minded MD podcast with your money best friends. I'm Dr. Brittany Helford.
And I'm Dr. Leisha Taylor.
And of course, we're here to help you build wealth and make good money decisions so you can create the life you desire with more control over your time. Leisha, can we talk about one of the most important money moves we've made as doctors? And I don't know about you, but for me, when I think about this, it's actually insurance. Yes, I know it's not sexy, but it is absolutely essential, especially disability insurance.
Facts. I got mine right after med school, before residency even started. And let me tell you, Prati Botto at PKA Insurance Group made the whole process so smooth. He actually cared, broke down everything, explained the fine print, and got me the best policy for the best price.
And what I love is that he treats everyone like that, residents, attendings, even docs on visas. He literally got you. He's super responsive, super knowledgeable. And if there's a better deal out there, he will tell you.
Oh, and if you're healthy, you could get approved for up to $10 million in life insurance. So not just disability insurance in only 5 minutes. No labs, no hassle.
So if you're serious about protecting your income and your family, call 1-800-258-1018.
Or email pradeep at pkainsurance.com.
All right, Leisha. Well, I know that you just came back from a fantastic trip because you're always taking beautiful, extravagant, luxurious trips. So tell us about this vacation to Jamaica.
Yeah, it was great. I went to Jamaica for one of my friend's weddings. She's actually one of my friends that I met in med school. This trip served like a dual purpose. It was like a vacation, a chance for me to support my friend in her wedding, and a chance for me to reunite with my med school bestie. So it was amazing. Had a great time. Probably drank way too many cocktails and ate way too much and whatever, but it was amazing. Great to see friends. One of the cool things about this resort is that it came with access to like the hydrotherapy, which is like a part of the spa. And so you could go in there for free. So we went in there and there's the wet sauna and the dry sauna and then the massage chairs and the warm chairs. And then there's all these different pools. There's like a cold tub and a hot tub and a warm tub. So it was just nice to experience this with my med school classmates. I mean, we were chilling on the warm chairs, putting cucumbers over our eyes. Like it was a whole vibe. That was amazing. We were treated like VIPs because she was having her wedding in the area. And so just a lovely, lovely trip. My friends with kids had an amazing time because they left their kids at home and said that this was the highlight of their summer. And so they talked about how freeing it feels to be able to let loose and not have to perform childcare. I'm happy that they had a good time and I had a good time. My friend got married. And so all is well. It was a great vacation.
Good. I am so glad to hear. Yeah, I love whenever we're able to go to the spa. It just puts you in a different mood. I don't have to do anything. I'm just supposed to sit here and allow this water to nurture and massage my muscles. So whenever we go on a vacation, we typically do a spa day. This is more of my husband's type of thing, but I really, really enjoy getting in the water. I don't so much do the saunas though, because I feel like I just sweat. Do you find that relaxing?
Here's the thing. When I'm in there, I'm uncomfortable. It's hot.
Yes.
How long do I have to stay in here? But I think it's the effects like when you get out of the sauna and you do the other parts of the water treatments, it feels really good. I will be honest and say this time we actually did not do the sauna simply because we were there for a wedding and some of my friends had their hair done and they were like, girl, I'm not trying to sweat right now. So we're going to skip this part.
I hear your friends. I hear your friends. Yes. I prefer to sweat because I've exercised, not just because I'm sitting like, my gosh, I'm sitting and I am just sweating bullets. I'm happy that you are able to relax and really rekindle some of those relationships. When I think about some of my medical school friends, there are many who I have not talked to in a while. So this is a little nudge for me to send them a text message just to say, hey, I've been thinking about you. I hope life is well. What's going on? Because those relationships are really important. And and medical school is hard. And they definitely pulled me through. So the wedding, I'm sure, was beautiful, right? Anything to share? Anything memorable about the wedding itself?
Well, the memorable thing is that it rained. Maybe didn't go according to how she had planned it in her head, but it was still very beautiful. The preacher was talking about showering down on their love. And so, made light of the situation. Pictures came out beautiful. We were just, a little bit wetter than we imagined, but it was still really, really nice.
Oh, yeah. They say that that's good luck. So I hope that that means that she's going to have a long, happy marriage where there are some sacrifices, but when she looks over the longitudinal relationship, maybe not a snapshot, that she's very pleased and that they foster a lot of joy and love. So happy to hear. I love to see people get married. It's not easy, but it's definitely worth it. So.
As physicians, one of the most important things that we can do is make sure that we secure our income because a lot of our financial plans are contingent on our high doctor income. One of the things that you will need to do is make sure that you get long term disability insurance.
Now, Pradeep and his team at PKA Insurance Group have a reputation for putting people over profits and always doing what's best. Do not hesitate to email PKA Insurance and his team today.
They will help you get the insurance you need with the service you deserve.
Are you ready to negotiate like a boss? Let's be real. Most employees don't negotiate, but their employers expect them to. That means you're literally leaving money, benefits, and flexibility on the table.
But not anymore. Just as our client, after going through the Negotiate Like a Boss Accelerator, she landed a big salary increase, the schedule she actually wanted, and more time to spend with her family and pursue her passion.
You'll get proven scripts and tools to negotiate with clarity and confidence, live hot seat coaching to practice and perfect your pitch, and real time feedback so you're not guessing, you're growing.
Because, like I always say, I work better when I'm paid well. Don't wait. Procrastination is a pricey mistake.
Enroll in Negotiate Like a Boss Accelerator today. Click the link in the show notes. This opportunity will not be around forever. All right. Well, Leisha, while you're out in Jamaica, I've been thinking about should I buy a short term rental property? At one of our episodes, maybe it was like closing out the year, starting out 2025, I had mentioned that we wanted to purchase 2 more properties. So that is something that I've been really considering. Recently, I've had a conversation with a couple of doctors who are doing this. They have short term rental properties, and there have been many perks, some tax savings, which are great. They have another asset that is appreciating in value. But I've also heard of some headaches like, oh, I don't know. I should have figured this out before I had purchased this thing. So I figured this would be a great conversation to have because I know many docs are thinking about purchasing real estate and using short term rental properties as a pathway to wealth.
Yeah, I think this is a great topic and something that I have considered and something that my friends and I were talking about when I was at this wedding. It's so interesting that you bring this up. One of my friends mentioned having a short-term rental property that was initially they were going to put it on Airbnb. And they tried that for a while and they actually stopped doing that and converted it to a long term rental just because the area in which the house was located was not necessarily a prime target for a lot of people coming in town for short term vacations. And so they were essentially having some difficulties keeping it rented. And I remember my friend's husband was talking about it and he said, Leisha, there would be some months we'd make thousands of dollars and other months we wouldn't even break even on the mortgage. And that fluctuation in income was one of the reasons that they decided to just convert it to a long-term rental and know that they had monthly income that they could count on. I have contrastly talked to other physicians who have really successful Airbnbs, and that is now serving as one of their main sources of side income. So I think this is a good topic because it seems like, as you alluded to earlier, for some people, it could really be a lucrative side hustle and also a good means for tax savings. And for other people, it's a source of stress and maybe costs them money. And so trying to figure out what side of the spectrum you may be on and if this is something you could consider, I think is a great topic to delve into.
Awesome. So, some of the things that we'll cover plus is the time and team that might be needed, some of the financials, as Alicia mentioned, the tax benefits, and there's 5 questions to ask yourself to understand if short term rentals are a good fit for you. And the first question, Alicia, I think is a really good one, especially as we have a podcast for physicians who are still practicing, like you and I are. One of those big questions is the time. Do you have the time or a team to manage it? Because when we think about short term rentals, it's not like a long term rental where you find one tenant, you have them sign a lease, you kind of set it and forget it. If there's a little maintenance, then you send somebody, you go in, you fix it yourself. It's pretty easy, honestly. We have a long term rental property, and the hardest part is getting somebody in the unit. But once they're in the unit, it's pretty simple, especially if you vet them very well before. But with short term rental properties, you have this high turnover. When we think about short term, the definition is 7 days or less. So if you have someone renting out your property for 4 days every single week, then that means every time somebody leaves, you have to go in, you have to clean this property, ensure that they haven't broken anything, and submit whatever documentation you need to Airbnb. You have to restock, keep up the maintenance, not only inside of the home, but also outside of the home. So short term rental properties are not passive rentals unless you have a team, unless you have someone who's helping you to manage the listing, someone who's helping you to manage the property. And if you're hiring a manager, you can expect to pay about 20 to 30% of the gross income, which is going to depreciate your net income, right? The profits that you're going to actually be making from the short term rental property. Having a team is the first thing to consider if this is actually a strategy that's going to work for you.
Wow, I didn't realize that the cost of a manager was 20 to 30%. I guess that makes sense because I've heard that the cost of someone to manage like a long-term rental, which is known to be much more passive, is about 10%. So it makes sense that something that requires significantly more work and is more active would cost more than that. But I'm thinking, man, 20 to 30% is not a small chunk of change, especially when you factor that in. You still want to make sure that you're breaking even on the mortgage. And then I've heard, Brittany, correct me if I'm wrong, if you're going to have a short-term rental, oftentimes people will post it on these different sites, of which Airbnb is one of them. And I think that the Airbnb site might take a chunk of your profits, right? And so I don't know about you, Brittany, but I know sometimes when my friends would look at Airbnbs for maybe upcoming trips that they want to take, they would be thinking to themselves, man, this is a lot of money in fees, right? And people who own houses that they put on Airbnb, they often talk about how Airbnb takes a chunk. And so it's like, man, you got to pay a chunk to Airbnb and now you got to pay a chunk to the manager. You better make sure you're making enough profit to even break even, let alone turn a profit. So I can see how making sure not only do you have the time, but that the numbers initially are working out. Because as you mentioned, it seems like there's a lot kind of involved there.
So, Alicia, I think you raise a really good point. And my husband and I were watching this documentary kind of on Airbnb and how the evolution of Airbnb from when they started, how everybody loved Airbnb, like as the consumer, how we loved it. But now things are changing and we are starting to weigh out, is it more beneficial for me to actually go to a hotel versus an Airbnb? And so that takes us through our second point is, can you handle the income variability and the vacancy? And as you alluded to with your conversation at the wedding, where some of your friends, they initially got into Airbnb, but then now they've converted it into a long-term rental property because of the vacancy and because of variability in income. One, you have to make sure that you have a great location, right? Location, location, location. We talked about that in our home buying episode. But with Airbnb is not only about the location, you also have to kind of curate something unique about your unit, your property to attract tenants, to attract the renters on Airbnb and also Vrbo. Usually, when you think about this, short term rentals can have some variability in their vacancy. Some estimate like 30%, depending on the season. So, are you making enough money to weather the storm to make the numbers make sense? And so, whenever we're thinking about an Airbnb, you have to understand what is a potential vacancy rate for that area. And that is one of the considerations that I had to dive deep into when we were considering our Airbnb. We were going to purchase it actually in Detroit. And we still may purchase some property in Detroit because, I'm from Michigan. My family lives very close by. Detroit is up and coming. But where we were hoping to purchase and what is ongoing in the city right now, they were showing that there was about a 30% vacancy rate. And the numbers just did not make sense for us as a short term rental property. You can use websites like AirDNA to help you to estimate, to evaluate some of the listings that are already on the market on Airbnb and to understand their vacancy rate to help you to predict your vacancy rate. But especially if you don't have the right location, a curated experience, like you're offering something else, like a pool or a game room or something really to attract that customer, you can expect that you'll likely have a higher vacancy rate and you just got to make the numbers work out.
Yeah, that's true and something definitely to consider. And I would venture to say that people can make a lot more money from short term rentals than long term rentals. That's the whole reason why people do it. You can charge more for a short term stay. And so you just got to make sure that the amount of money that you're making, you still have some profit once you pay all of these different sites and organizations that are helping you list it. One of the things that people have done, Brittany, I'm not sure if you've seen this, but I'm on Facebook and there are some of these physician Facebook groups. And there's one specifically, I can't remember the name off the top of my head. It's a Facebook group specifically for doctors with vacation homes. And so people will list their vacation homes or other people will post and say like, "Hey, I'm taking my family of whatever to name a location." And then people will say, "Oh, I have a property there." Or people who are listing their property will say, "Hey, anybody want to visit my property?" They will offer a discount and say, "If you purchase off Airbnb, I can give you 30% off because I don't have to pay those Airbnb fees." And so it benefits
Mhm.
the consumer and the seller, if you will, because the
Mhm.
consumer is like, "Oh, I get to pay 30% less." And then the seller's like, okay, I have access to this group of potential renters in this case who I think are pretty trustworthy, who might be really interested in my vacation home. And so I know that that's something that people have done to just sort of increase the chances that their property will be rented and decrease the vacancy rates. And so I think that that potentially could be helpful, but nothing is foul proof. I know some people in that group will talk about how, depending on the location of their property, certain times of the year are much more popular than others. And so it's not necessarily that the month to month vacancy rate is 20 or 30%, but it's that, if they have a property in a prominent ski area, maybe the winter months are very popular, but then the summer months not as much, or vice versa, depending on where their property is located. And so just keeping into mind not only the month to month vacancy variability, but the seasonality variability, and just thinking about, okay, what can I do during those lower demand months in order to increase visibility and increase the chance that it'll be rented, with obviously the sole goal of decreasing the vacancy rate and hopefully having some stability in your monthly income.
Yeah, the seasons are really important. And whenever you're thinking about this and the variability and vacancy, especially if you're purchasing a property that is outside of your market, like outside of your zone of genius, the area that you're living, you want to have a clear pulse on what's going on. So Alicia said, like, okay, if the high season is winter because of ski, but what else is going on in the summer? Are there any concerts? Like, you really want to understand what's going on. So that way you can also change the rate on Airbnb, right? If you're trying to make the most for your money, make the numbers make sense. If there's a concert or a playoffs game or something like that coming into your area, then that is an opportunity for you to increase the rates. But you don't know if you should do that if you're unaware of what is happening within your city. So that's just another time thing. But especially if you're living outside of the area in which you have your rental property, making sure that you're aware of what's going on. So I want to take us to number three. And this is a big one for us in considering this. And it is not only like what is going on as far as events and attractions in your area of your rental property, but also thinking about, do you understand the local rules and risks? And so this is really important when you're thinking about zoning laws and also the short term rental permits. When short term rental properties for Airbnb first started, it wasn't as regulated as it is now. Now, there are many cities that are imposing regulations and restrictions about how often you can rent, which areas you can rent, and the percentage of time that you might be able to have that listed as a short term rental property versus as another type of rental property. And then you also have to pay additional money for these permits and potentially fees if you get caught operating outside of the rules and restrictions. Another big thing is if you want to make this semi passive, not have to think about how you're going to do the landscaping and all of the outdoor maintenance, then sometimes people opt for condos. Condos offer a little bit more security as well. But then you have to think about the HOA, the housing association rules for that particular condo. And a lot of times, these condo associations do not allow for you to have a short term rental unit within that condo. So when we were considering it, after I did a little bit more research into what Detroit's regulations are, it restricted the amount of time that you can have the property listed as a short term rental. And really, it just did not make sense from a math perspective. Now, I thought about, okay, maybe a portion of this time I could also convert this to a midterm rental. But again, it takes more like just mental energy for me to think about, okay, what percentage of time has this been a short term rental? Do I have the appropriate permits, restrictions, regulations? And then how am I going to convert this to a midterm rental? So all of that, I was just like, okay, I don't know. I don't know if I have enough bandwidth at the moment to adhere to the laws within this city and to do this in a profitable way.
That's something definitely to keep in mind, and something that I didn't think about was the local rules and risk, right? Because you just gave a great example of how, like, hey, Leisha, we were thinking about buying this property in Detroit. Based on how I would have wanted it to go, maybe the numbers would have worked out. But based on local rules that prohibited me from doing things the way that I would have planned them in my head, the numbers no longer work out, right? These different rules and restrictions that prevent me from doing things in a different way. And I think another thing to kind of keep in mind along that is how many Airbnbs you can actually have. I remember a couple of years ago, Brittany, you might be more up to date on this than I am. There were some rules, at least where I lived in the state of Georgia, on how many Airbnb properties somebody could actually have. This is me speculating here, but maybe the hotel industry and so forth, and maybe people who own homes are like, hey, we're having all of these people in our neighborhood that we don't know because everybody is putting their property on Airbnb, and we don't like that. There needs to be some sort of restrictions on who can actually rent out their property, how often they can rent out their property, and how many properties they can even have to do such a thing. And so I remember, I think the city of Atlanta, or at least in Georgia, they were coming up with some rules and regulations. I'm not sure if those things ended up coming into law or if they're replicated in other states, but I just wanted to say that there might be some restrictions on even how many properties you can even rent out.
I'm not exactly sure, but I can see how that makes sense because you have these investors who just come in and purchase these properties and then put them on as Airbnbs. And this is the thing that they do. They have hundreds of doors under management and they have these huge companies and systems in order to do that. So I can understand how a city would want to regulate that. And also from a hotel perspective, how that industry would want to regulate that because it's removing revenue from their business. I know that Atlanta has some restrictions on zoning permits and also the amount of time that you can have something listed as an Airbnb because I recently had a conversation with someone who's doing this and she's like, yeah, that was a headache. We're figuring it out, but I was not expecting this. So I think that it's really important that you do your due diligence, that you understand, especially if you're outside of your market or even if you're in your market, what are some of the regulations? And also think about if I cannot do this as a short term rental, which is less than 7 days rented. Can I convert it to a midterm rental? Midterm rental is 8 to 30 days. Do I have the bandwidth to manage a midterm rental? And how would that work? What would be the marketing? Who would be my audience? And then if not, can I still cash flow if rented as a long-term rental property? And that is where Kevin and I kind of decided that this property, at least the properties that we were looking at, were not worth it. Because if we needed to convert to a long-term rental property, we would be losing money given the amount of money that we have to put into the property in order to make the property work. So if it cannot cash flow as a long-term rental, then this is not the property for you to purchase because short-term rental properties, all of the regulations are changing. So you just want to have a backup plan, just, plan B in the case that you need to convert. And the fourth thing that I would say is when you're thinking about that, as I mentioned, Kevin and I kind of decided that that property that we were evaluating was not worth it because of this one metric that I think we often forget about. When we think about rental property or real estate in general, we think about all of the potential tax benefits, also the appreciation over time. We know that real estate appreciates from market appreciation just over time. And we're thinking that this is a great asset. But really, when you're considering short term rental properties or rental properties in general, you want to think about this metric called a cash on cash return. And essentially, a cash on cash return is the annual net income divided by the total cash invested. So the annual net income is essentially the amount of profits that you're making. After you cover all of your expenses, how much money did you make? on this investment. And then you want to divide that by your total cash invested. So, giving you an example here, if you invested $80,000, some portion of that is down payment, some portion of that is repairs and getting the property up listed. So, you put in $80,000 of cash, your hard earned money, into this property. And then at the end of the year, you have $16,000 in profit. Then you would think that your cash on cash return is about 20%. Okay. So 16,000 divided by 80,000. Now, 20% of cash on cash return is actually quite good for a short term rental property. People say to aim for above 10%, really. But if there's anything under 8%, then it's likely not worth the effort or the risk. And you should likely choose another investment, something that's easier, like investing in the stock market, than actually thinking about purchasing this property as a rental property.
Nice, nice. Just so that I make sure I get the numbers right. When you are calculating your net income, right? Your net profits, does that include the cost of the mortgage? Or you've already paid the mortgage, you paid the cleaning companies and all, you paid the Airbnb fees, and this is what's left over is 16,000 in your example a year.
It's everything. I mean, ideally, the amount of money that you should make every month should cover all of your expenses plus. So you got to think about, what am I going to be taking home every single month as a profit? And it should cover every single expense: property taxes, manager, if you have one, any type of permits, regulations, like certifications, things that you have. Everything needs to be covered by the amount of money that you're going to be making. And then you still need to have some money in your pocket.
That's a lofty goal, especially now, given interest rates, right?
Oh,
You
yes,
know, it may
yes.
be difficult because your mortgage payment just may be so much more now with the higher interest rates that by the time you pay the mortgage, pay the cleaners, pay the Airbnb fees, you may not have $1,000 or $2,000 left over in profit. Heck, you may not even have a few $100s left over in profit. I think one of the things that this brings up for me is the opportunity cost, right? Given the time and the effort that is required, what else could you have done to make a similar profit that didn't require as much time and effort? And I remember
Hmm.
for some people, they might say, Leisha, you know what? I could do this short term rental or I could do a long term rental, right? But when I calculate all of the fees and all of the time and all of the effort that's required, I'm making about 7% of my money each year. Well, I could have just put my money in an index fund, making 7 to
Hmm.
10% per year, and that would require no effort. And so
Hmm.
really, it's not only, in my opinion, about the cash on cash return, but also about the opportunity cost of what else you could do with that money in terms of investing that may or may not require as much effort.
There are some other benefits that we're going to discuss regarding rental properties, but I agree. That's why the cash on cash return like that needs to be at between 10 to 20%, but definitely higher than what you would typically earn in the stock market. And the opportunity costs are huge because we can always make more money, but we can't make more time, especially if this is potential headache down the road. And when you think about mortgages, that was something that you raised with the interest rates right now. There are other ways to finance a property. You can do seller financing, which can help you to lower the interest rates and decrease costs. So there are various ways to finance a property. So you don't have to necessarily think about using a traditional mortgage. And when you do use a traditional mortgage for a rental property, for most companies, depending on if they're used to working with investors or not, banks are going to want you to put 20% down, right? So 20% down of whatever the purchase price is of that property. So it's more than what we think about as, like, if we're purchasing this as your primary residence and you're getting like a doctor's loan and you're putting 0 to 5 to 10% down, when you're purchasing something as a rental property, typically they desire more down payment. So yeah, the math has to math. And for us, at least for that one property that we're thinking about, it just didn't make sense. So we decided not to do it. But I did go through like all the little mental calculations, do my research on AirDNA to look at the vacancy rates and variability in income. The reason why we were considering this is hinted at the tax savings. So, cash on cash return is one number that you highly need to consider. And also the opportunity cost, as Leisha mentioned. And then another one is, how can you make this work for you from a tax savings? I had a conversation, one of my friends, he's also a doc. He's texting me. He's like, Brittany, my rental properties didn't save me anything on taxes. And I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe I need to have a phone call with you to explain why. He had mostly had long-term rental properties. And so because of how the government characterizes different activities and different types of income, right? Your active income cannot be offset by passive losses. So if you have a long-term rental property and say you are doing, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but cost segregation study, right? So that you can take a depreciation, accelerated depreciation of that rental property instead of taking it over 27 years. Say you want to take all of the little components and depreciate them down over 5 to 10 years, right? Or if you invested a lot of money into the property to get it up to speed and you're at a net loss, that's still a passive loss because that is a long term rental property and the government characterizes that as passive income. But when you do short term rental properties, there's an opportunity, depending on how you do this, that it can be deducted from your active income, your W 2 income. So for docs and high income earners, this could be a huge tax savings, which takes me to another conversation that I had when I was at the Society of Hospital Medicine conference. I was sitting with someone and I talked about, I like finance and all these things. And I was like, yeah, we have a tax problem where I work about 30% of my time for free. And he was like, oh, I'm sorry that you have that problem. I'm like, don't you have this problem? Because you're married to a physician too, right? So how do you not have this a problem? And he told me that he and his wife do short-term rental properties, Airbnb, and they materially participate. So they're able to deduct all of their losses and doing this cost segregation, the depreciation from their active income. So I'm going to pause there because I know you got some questions and we can clarify all of the details regarding this.
Yeah. So it seems like what I'm hearing you say is, Leisha, it's not only how much profit I'm getting from this property, but how much money in taxes I'm saving by having this listed as a short term rental property. Because one of the things that you're making the distinction of is, hey, short term rental property. So when you have a property that you rent out for less than 7 days each time, they have substantially different tax benefits than a property that you might rent out for a longer period of time. So if you have a house that you own and you have a tenant and that tenant pays you a monthly income for 12 months and you have a lease, that is very different tax wise than if you have a short term rental property that you have on Airbnb, for example. And you're mentioning, it seems like in the story of you talking to another doc couple, and he talks about how him and his wife leverage that to substantially decrease their taxes. And it seems like some of these tax savings that you can come into play, it's not only depreciation, so right, separating the costs of the structure of the home from the land, from the windows to whatever, doing what's called a cost segregation analysis. Because when you separate out the individual parts of the home, you can depreciate them over different lengths of time and AKA saves larger sums of money on your taxes up front. So that's one of the things. But then also it seems that you can deduct passive, or you can deduct your active losses from your active income. So when we make money, it's categorized as active income. Did we do a lot of work for it? Or passive income? Did we not do a lot of work for it? And the government treats those things differently from a tax perspective. When you have a long-term rental, that's considered passive income. So you can only deduct your passive losses from your passive income. So it limits you on how much tax savings you have. But when you have a short-term rental, because it takes a lot more work to do that, they consider that active income. And if you have some active losses because you've depreciated that property, then you can deduct that from your active income, which is not only the income that you earned from the property, but also the income that you earn from being a physician. And so if you have this property that maybe you paid $300,000 for, I don't know, and let's say you decided to depreciate 30% of the property, which is $90,000, you can deduct that $90,000 from your doctor income. And that's a big tax saving. You're talking, hey, Leisha, there's some tax maneuvering we can do here to save ourselves quite a bit of money. And I'm listening to you talk about it and I'm like, yeah, I'm reminded of why I was thinking about this initially. But I think there are some rules that you have to follow in certain amount of hours and things like that. Can you talk about some of the rules before we get too excited?
Yes, right, right. So this is effectively called a short-term rental loophole, and it requires material participation. So you have to meet one of these tests. So you have to meet one of these criteria if you want any of the losses, any of the deductions, the depreciations to decrease your active W-2 doctor income. So the first one is 500 plus hours per year on the property. That's a lot of time. So 500 plus hours per year on the property. That equates to, I think, about 10 hours per week, right? It is a decent amount of time, especially for docs who are working full time as a physician. And so that is one criteria. If you work 500 hours on a property, that could be listing it on Airbnb, managing the tenants, going in and cleaning it yourself, calling people, whatever. 500 hours, you meet that test. Okay, great. You say that you've met the test of material participation. You can deduct all of the stuff from your active income. Another test or eligibility criteria is 100 plus hours per year, and no one else does more. Now, this one is not so hard to do, especially if you're going to be the person who's going to be managing the listing and doing some of the other nuances. You can have 100 plus hours, but the one thing is that no one else does more than you. For many of us, we talked about, do we have the time or do we have the team? So if you leverage a property manager, then that property manager will likely do more hours than you. So you want to make sure that you at least try to limit their amount of hours. You do 100 hours and then you ensure that you do more time than anyone else and you have really good documentation. The last test is you're the only one that is working on the rental. So you have no other employees, you have no one else who's helping you. You're doing all of the work. And that way you get to deduct all the expenses, you get to reduce your W 2 income and offset, as Leisha mentioned, by tens of thousands of dollars from your active income without being a real estate professional.
These are really interesting rules because they're different, I think, from what the government calls real estate professional status, which is what some people who have long term rentals try to achieve, right? If you have a long term rental, so you're renting the property out each month to a tenant that pays you a monthly amount in rent, if you're doing that and you want to be able to deduct your active losses from active income, you have to, I think, work 750 hours a year and you can't have any other job that you work more than that. So it's harder for physicians, especially physicians who are full time, to qualify for real estate professional status in that way with long term rentals, unless they have a spouse that maybe can work on the properties while they work as a physician. But this is different, right? When you have short term rentals, the rules and the qualifications are a little bit different. So for those of us who maybe don't want to clean toilets and have to wash linens after each thing, then maybe the second one that you mentioned, the second and third one, which is we're the only ones working on the rental, that does not seem like anything I want to sign myself up for. Or 100 hours a year, but nobody else does more. It seems like the people cleaning and the people helping me list my property will probably be doing more. So it seems like if I'm going to be someone who works as a physician, maybe part-time or something, and also has a short-term rental, then I probably do need to try to meet the first qualification, which is 500 plus hours a year, which is like you equated to, Brittany, about 10 hours a week. Do you happen to know some of the tasks that you might have to complete if you have a property manager? If someone's listening to this episode says, this sounds great, I have a property in a good location that I think could make some money from a short-term rental, what would that person be doing for 10 plus hours a week?
If they have a property manager, I think it would be difficult for them to meet the 500 because honestly, like once you get the property up and running, it's not going to be that much time. But say, for example, that you purchase a property and it requires a complete gut and renovation for you to get the property listed. And so you're going in, you're meeting with the contractors, you're reviewing everything, you're negotiating, you're meeting them at the site, you're picking the finishes and all of that. So all of that time will accumulate, right? Before you actually have that property listed. And then once the property is listed, then what you'll have is listing it on Airbnb, taking the photos, managing anyone who's interested, doing the bookkeeping, the accounting, all of that. So all of that stuff counts. But if you have a property manager who's listing the property, who's turning over the property as well, restocking the toilet tissue and purchasing all of the things, then I think it would be difficult for you to meet the material participation. The one thing that I don't know, I think that this could potentially work is if you do your due diligence beforehand and say you research 5 cleaning companies, you interview all of them and you just rotate. Okay, for the first 2 months, I'm going to use this cleaning company. For the next 2 months, you use this cleaning company. Because those companies are different, they likely will not have more than 100 hours because you're calling them and you're researching, then you could potentially still meet that second where you have 100 plus hours in the property and no one is working more than you because you're changing companies every couple of months.
Ah, I see. I see. And as someone listening to this, they might think, oh, that's a lot. Maybe I don't want to go for this. I wonder, Brittany, if you could have this status as a short term rental property and deduct it from your active income, maybe the first year you purchase the property and then not have that same status the next subsequent years. Because if you do a cost segregation analysis correctly, from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you can depreciate, you can do a bonus depreciation. I don't know if the laws have changed recently, but you used to be able to do a big chunk of bonus depreciation the first year you buy the property. So that would be the year where, in my earlier example, let's say you purchase a property for $300,000 and maybe you do bonus depreciation and you can depreciate 30%, so $90,000. like maybe that first year, because you have so much that you can depreciate, you deduct it from your active losses, and maybe the subsequent years, maybe you don't. But even in that initial year that you do it, if you're deducting $90,000 from your active income and you're in the 30% tax bracket, you're saving almost $30,000 on your taxes, which is not a small chunk of change. So correct me if I'm wrong, but is that feasible where maybe you could deduct it from your active income in year one and then not deduct it the other years?
Definitely. Yeah. So the rental property itself can be a rental property and it can transition from short term, long term, midterm, even within the year. Honestly, you can transition and you just got to make sure that you meet the criteria for the portion of time. And so it's going to take a really, really good documentation and a skilled accountant to help you to understand like what you can do if you meet the short-term rental loophole qualifications or not, especially if you're converting it over to a long-term rental midway, converting it from a long-term rental to a short-term rental. But the property can be fluid. And for the duration of time that you own the property, you can take advantage of the short-term rental versus long-term rental and do it that way. So there are ways that you can really get creative. Again, the documentation has to be solid, the accounting has to be solid, and you will definitely want to work with a tax professional to do this appropriately. The one thing that I just want to add before we close out, and there's so much more that I can say about this, honestly, but one of the things that you want to think about is like anytime you're taking a depreciation, that there is depreciation recapture. So sometimes we think about, oh yeah, I'm just gonna say that 30 grand, I'm gonna deduct the 90 grand from my taxes. I'm at a 30% tax rate, so I'm gonna save that 30 grand. After you take the depreciation, when you sell the asset, there can be some depreciation recapture on the time of sale. So one of the things that you want to think about is just talking to your tax accountant beforehand about this idea that you want to take bonus depreciation over in year one or how many years you want to span it out and say, okay, if I were to sell this property, and what would the recapture be? Basically, recapture means that the IRS taxes your total depreciation claimed when you sell the asset. And the tax rate is going to change depending on what the laws are. I think in 2025, that recapture is about 25% tax rate. So still likely lower than your effective federal income tax rate, but something to consider because you might have to pay some taxes on the sale. Now, there are ways that you can handle that. When you sell the property, you can kind of roll it into a 1031 exchange, which basically means that you like purchase another property in order to defer taxes. So it requires a little bit of real estate savviness, and you just want to talk to a CPA about the recapture. If I were to purchase this property now, do a depreciation, what would recapture look like for me down the road?
Yeah, no, this is really helpful. And Brittany, I'm curious, does your current tax accountant do the cost segregation analysis, or do you have to elicit the services of a tax professional who specifically specifies in real estate? Like, how are you able to do this?
So if we were to do it, my tax accountant could use the information from the cost segregation analysis and incorporate that into our taxes, but we have to hire a specific company in order to do the cost segregation. So there's someone who comes in, they analyze the building. I haven't done it myself or I haven't engaged anyone yet, but does an assessment, like you said, of all of the things that within the building and breaks it down to its components, to the value of that. And then you can depreciate that over time and elect like which components you want to depreciate over what period of time. So you have to call a separate company in order to do the cost segregation analysis. That information will then be presented to your tax accountant and they will incorporate that into the tax strategy.
Okay. All right. So let's do a recap. I don't know. I went through phases of this episode, Brittany, where I was like, this ain't for me. And then I went through the end. I'm like, oh, this is for me. There might be some people listening thinking the same thing. Certain phases we thought absolutely not. And then we thought, heck yes. So let us know. How do we know if it's right for us again?
So, the first thing to think about is your location and ensuring that if you purchase, are you going to be close to the property or is this going to be a property that is off site, outside of your market that you may not have easy access to? And also understanding some of the local rules and regulations in that area. The reason why the location kind of keys into that first question that I have is, do you have the time or a team to manage it? Is because if you do not have the time or a team, then this is going to impact the amount of money that you're able to generate from this potential asset. Understanding the rules and regulations will help you to incorporate that into your prediction of vacancy and cash flow variability. So I think that those are the really big things. And then understanding some of the tax benefits and if it will work for you, if you have the time and the energy to actually meet the criteria to materially participate. Because short term rental property, as we have outlined, has a lot of pros and cons. Some of the pros is that, yes, you're going to be having a rental property, so potentially can increase in value over time through market appreciation, bring in cash flow, and then also some of the tax benefits. But you just got to make sure that the numbers are going to work for you, that you have the time and energy to do it, and that you can weather the storm of potential changes in regulations and also seasonality of the investment.
This sounds great. This sounds great. I am curious. This is a bit of a personal question, Brittany. How did you and your husband come to the decision that you wanted to invest in real estate? And let me give you a little bit of context for this question. I'm thinking maybe I want to have a certain net worth first before I branch out into active real estate or passive real estate. Other people feel like, nope, real estate is going to be my primary means for building wealth or generational wealth that I might pass on to my heirs. And so I'm just curious if you and your husband said, let's make sure we're at this certain financial space first, make sure our student loans are gone, make sure we have our primary home, make sure our kids' college funds are taken care of, and then we'll invest in real estate. Or was this always kind of part of your overall investing plan?
It was not part of our overall investing plan. I wish I could say that we have been more thoughtful from the beginning to say, hey, here are the various opportunities for us to actually leverage. My husband, he has a stronger legacy of generational wealth than I do. His parents, they own rental properties and they're in Brooklyn. So they have appreciated in value just from market appreciation. But I know his mama and daddy, I love them to death. They are so kind hearted. They are not charging market rate for their rent. Like some of their tenants have been in the property for like 30 years and they haven't increased the rent. I knew that they had these rental properties. I didn't really see the benefits of it early on when we were first dating because you don't have insights into oftentimes people's accounts and their financials. My parents also had some rental properties in Flint, Michigan, but they did it a different way. They targeted a different audience and they eventually sold all of their properties. And so I don't think they leveraged it as much as they could. Now that we are student loan debt free and I have acquired this financial savviness, I'm just thinking about how can we continue to generate cash flow because we work extremely hard. We're exchanging time and energy. And so, how can I generate more cash flow through areas of diversification? But to your point, there's an opportunity cost there because having a rental property is not 100% passive. Now, I have somebody moving out of our long term rental property and I have to turn over the property. It's not as much work as a short term rental property, but it's still work, right? I had to post the thing, I had to review the applications, blah, 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 blah. And so for us, it's now how do we create additional streams of cash flow? How do we be protective of our time? Although managing a property is taxing, sometimes it's not as taxing as me going into the hospital. It doesn't separate me as much from my family and it gives me a little bit more control over my schedule. So we're just trying to build out some of that because I can effectively manage a property from afar. I don't have to physically be here. I can have somebody else to do it for us. And so that's where we are. It's just like focusing on how can we continue to generate cash flow so that we can protect more of our time.
I love that for you. And I think physicians who have high earning potential, sometimes this question is a little bit different, right? Because you can make so much money, relatively speaking, by just doing more of your current job. But as you mentioned, as someone such as yourself who is married, who has children, who already feels like you work a lot and would like to, it seems like work less, especially in the hospital setting, you're thinking, all right, how can I decrease my time in the hospital setting without sacrificing my family's financial security? And so you're thinking, okay, maybe I could get some other streams of income so that if I cut back in medicine, I still got more money coming in. And it seems like maybe real estate is one of those ways. But then, of course, you're balancing, all right, if I'm doing short term rental, maybe it's a little bit more active. So maybe I'm not completely off because I'm still working, quote unquote, but I'm able to work from home. And that still is beneficial for me. You're nodding your head. So I think I got it. Is that right?
You got it. You got it. You got it. For a while, it challenged me to question my commitment to medicine, but I don't think that I'm any less committed I also just acknowledge that there are other priorities besides patient care that I want to achieve in my life. Yes, I want to be a good doctor at the bedside. I still want to teach the medical students. I want to be able to help people to heal. But I also have to acknowledge that I can only do that if I am my best self. So this allows me to be a better version of myself by offsetting the balance a little bit and tilting it towards more passive streams of wealth.
All right, my last question before I know you kill me. If you were in my position, or if you just someone else, right? Maybe they're a physician, they're working more than they'd like to be in the hospital setting or in a clinic setting or whatever, and they're thinking about cutting back. What are some parameters that you would maybe say to them on advice as to whether they should get into the short-term real estate rental business? Like, do you suggest that they just focus on working in medicine and try to become student loan debt free first, like you are? Do you suggest that they buy a primary home first before branching into this? Like, I just wonder if there is any advice that you would give to folks like me who maybe not quite in your position yet.
So I think it's going to be individual for everyone. Oftentimes when people ask me this question, I ask them a question like, what are your goals? You know, how are you feeling about the work that you're doing? What would it mean for you if you were to delay some of those current goals for say a year, maybe not be so aggressive with paying down your student loan debt so that you can accumulate a little bit for a down payment on a rental property, plus have some cash in reserve just in case. Because we know with real estate, with having a property, there are emergencies that you're going to have to pay for. And you don't want to run into having a capital problem when you become a real estate investor. So that's where I would just push it back on them first to really do a thorough reflection of what their current goals are and see how this can be added into the picture. So that's going to be one thing because like money is emotional, it's psychological, but it's also logical. So now we got to look at the flip side. Like what do you have in assets? How much money do you have in reserves that you can potentially invest in this money and invest in this property? So that's emergency savings, right? Because once you put down your down payment and do the renovations. You don't want to be broke just in case something else were to happen. All right. Then what other sources of income of capital do you have? Because sometimes people think that they have to have a ton of money just to get started. It really depends on your location. It depends on your market. It depends on what you want to do. And it depends on how you leverage some of the other sources of capital that you have. I'm not pushing you. Remember, this is for information, no, and educational purposes only, right? Educational entertainment, right? Okay, so let me just put that out there. All right. There are people who I know who have sold their cars who say, okay, you know, I can take the bus. I can take the bus for 2 years because this is a goal of mine. Or people who have borrowed from their 401k. I'm putting all this money away from retirement. I'm going to borrow from my 401k and use that money to purchase an asset. But you really want to understand that it's going to be cash flowing, right? Look at and do your due diligence and calculate that cash on cash return so that you can understand that, okay, it might be cash flowing today, but what would that look like 5 years down the road? If regulations were to change and kind of to have a myopic view of today, but also have a long term view, a longitudinal view as well. So I don't know if that was very clear. I think to understand what your goals are, what you're trying to achieve, and then be very logical and think about the financials and not only just look at what today is, but then also have a longitudinal prediction of worst case scenario. What would this property do for you?
That sounds great. That sounds great. All right. We spent a lot of time on this. Thank you for indulging me, answering my questions, and also educating us on short term rentals. This is definitely something that I am going to keep in mind. Hopefully, the audience will as well. All right, let's transition into our fun money segment. Brittany, what is something fun that you are doing with money?
Alicia, I feel like this is like reminiscent of last year where I highlighted that I had gone to Home Depot and purchased way too many plants. I did it again. I am embracing that just digging in dirt, pulling out weeds is therapeutic for me. I get in the zone, I lose time. And I enjoy seeing the little butterflies that come to the plants, looking at the flowers, and also having my kids be able to pull a piece of fruit off of a plant. And for me to know that it hasn't been sprayed with pesticides, it's been grown with love. So I've spent a lot of money on purchasing plants this year. We now have 3 blueberry bushes and a blackberry bush and 3 strawberry plants. But I see this as an investment because year year after year, we're going to reap a bigger harvest, a greater harvest for our produce because these plants, these fruiting plants, they come back every single year. So our blueberry bush has substantially more blueberries on it than it did last year. So I just see like I'm planting the seeds. This is like a little bit of investment. Maybe I could turn gardening into a money a money principle to teach my kids.
I love this for you. You know what? You're reminding me of Meghan Markle or Meghan Sussex's garden on her show with Love Meghan. Like, I am fascinated by the beauty of that garden and how when she wants to cook, she goes to her garden and there are all these beautiful fruits and vegetables and they're fresh. And it just, I'm like, oh, last weekend I went out to the Battery, which is like this location in Atlanta where the Braves play. And they actually weren't playing a
Mm.
game there, but they have just so many restaurants and bars and eateries and all kinds of things there. As I was eating there, I had one of the freshest salads that I had in a long time. And I remember thinking, man,
Mm.
this is so good. Wouldn't it be nice if I could have this fresh of a salad on a regular basis? So I agree with you. This is going to pay dividends. You're inspiring me. I definitely don't have a green thumb, but I'm like, maybe when I buy a house, I'll have a little space for a garden. Cause you're right. I mean, fruits are not cheap. I was also at the grocery store seeing how much blackberries cost, and it was way more than I thought they should cost. So I love this for you. Maybe you'll reap a huge harvest. I agree with you. I think you could do some wonderful things. My mind is spinning with all the things that you could do and how I could benefit. So keep buying those plants and all the fruits and all the things.
You should start with an herb garden. So if there's one particular herb that you like in your salads, like cilantro or parsley, those are my favorites. But just starting that, you can put that right next to a nice window and cut some leaves off every time you're cooking. I just love fresh herbs. I think they add so much flavor to anything that I'm preparing in the kitchen.
See, the problem is that they require work from me. And I'm like, can I be
Girl,
trusted? Maybe I should start small. I don't have any plants in my place because
none.
well, I
Okay.
don't have real plants. So what I do is I buy flake flowers that don't go that don't die and then they always look great. I'm like, okay, can I be trusted? Maybe with a small plant. You're inspiring me. We'll see how I feel in a week or two when I'm a little bit less motivated. I love this for you. You have to keep us posted on how your garden ends up going.
Will do. So what have you been purchasing if you're not purchasing plants?
Definitely have not been purchasing plants. Good question. Honestly, Brittany, I get a lot of joy from eating out. I'm just gonna be really honest. I like love eating amazing food. So I've been splurging on food lately, whether that is fresh fruits and vegetables. I make a smoothie each morning where I put a cup of fresh fruits, like mixed fruits and spinach and avocado and a protein shake and blend it up so I can have my fruits and veggies in the morning. I also go out to eat probably more than I should, but I love to eat, like I said, like fresh salads and like foods that maybe wouldn't be easy for me to make at home. And so that's actually what I've been spending money on is like fresh food. We talked last time about my travels, and I think I mentioned how I'm going to Japan for my birthday, probably be in Japan by the time this episode airs. I'll have to report back on how everything went. But one of the things that I'm also spending fun money on is a restaurant reservation in Tokyo. I want to have this authentic Japanese experience with omakase and the sushi and all of that. And so for me, I've been splurging a lot on food. I love to eat a good meal, girl. Love to eat a good meal.
Awesome. And as you're talking about this, I'm like, what is an omakase? What is an omakase?
Yeah. So when you go to a restaurant, usually it's at sushi restaurants. And from my understanding, basically the chef kind of determines what you're going to eat. And usually when it's a sushi kind of thing, is they will bring out the nigiri. So that's like the raw fish on the rice. And they bring out the different kinds of fish that are like, I guess, in season or that they're known for. And they'll bring out different courses each time. And so it's
Mm.
basically like you sit down. It's kind of expensive. In America, when I was living in LA, it was about $150 per person. So not exactly the cheapest dinner by far, but you would have like this 10-course meal. And you would start
Yeah.
off with like a ginger salad and a soup. And then they would bring out appetizers. And then you would get different chef selections of nigiri, which is usually really good and very, very fresh. And so I want to have that experience. I figure I'm going to Japan, I'm going to Tokyo. I want to have the best sushi of my life. I want to come back to America saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe how good that was. And so I want to have
Hmm.
this, chef inspired meal.
Yay. I love sushi. So you'll have to let us know how it goes. All right, people. So hopefully this presented you with another option to consider if short term rental properties are right for you. And if you enjoyed this episode, then please, please, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. And we just want to say thank you. Thank you for your attention today because we know that right now attention is a hot commodity. And so we appreciate you listening and we can't wait to see you in the next episode. Hello. Hello, and thank you for listening to our podcast. And because of that, we have something for you, our Wealthy Minds Blueprint.
Have you ever thought to yourself, I wish I could be better with money? Do you want to start investing and saving for retirement, but keep delaying because you don't know where to start? Our Wealthy Minds Blueprint is here to help.
This guide will teach you what you didn't learn in your training so you can stop being confused about money and start taking what we call wealthy-minded action.
We'll help you become a master of your finances and simplify investing so you can get started today. Take control of your financial future by downloading your free copy of the Wealthy Minds Blueprint now and start building the wealth you deserve.
One of the most important things you can do is ensure you have long-term disability insurance. Long-term disability insurance secures your income if the unexpected happens and you are unable to work due to medical illness, chronic conditions, or an accident.
Unfortunately, all insurance agents aren't created equal. Some of them are so focused on making a sale that they fail to reveal certain necessary information, tell you about discounts available, or clearly explain the process. Prati Botto and his team at PKA Insurance Group are different. They have a reputation of putting people over profits and always doing what's best.
If you need life insurance or disability insurance, reach out to Pradeep and his team today. They will help you get the insurance you need with the service you deserve.
Hello, everybody. It's me, Brooke. I'm recording a little disclaimer for my mommy, Dr. Brittany Halford, and her friend, Dr. Lisa Taylor. Just so you know, they're not financial advisors, tax professionals, lawyers, or financial planners. Everything you hear is for education and entertainment. It's not strict financial advice, you know. So use your best judgment, chat with a tax professional, and all those other people that you need to talk to. Thanks for tuning in today. Keep cruising on your journey to wealth and wellness. Bye-bye.